Okay, this is a quick tutorial that will give you some guidance on how to prepare for your end of topic assessment for the topic urban geography. And you will have already done a mid-topic assessment covering some of the material at the start of this topic. So it's unlikely that you're going to encounter much in the way of questions that relate to that material, or as a matter of fact, if any. So in this tutorial, I'm just going to quickly give you a guideline through what you're going to want to look at. And I'm going to use two of the sites on the National 5 Geography Revision site. First of all, looking at the urban geography pages, and you'll find that there are some video tutorials here that you can link into, but most importantly, I want to look at the urban checklist. So what sort of material are you going to want to prepare some revision notes on? Right. When we think about a city, we're obviously thinking about it being divided up into kind of four zones: the CBD, the inner city, the suburbs, and the rural urban fringe. And in this end of topic assessment, you are going to be focusing in on the last three, because in the mid topic assessment you were asked a question on the CBD. So you might very well see a question that looks at the inner city, and what that's going to look at is either what are the problems in inner city areas, specifically in the city you've studied, which in this case will be Glasgow, or you might be asked a question about how those problems can be solved. And what are they doing in Glasgow to help reduce the problems? So that would be looking at the Clyde waterfront developments, things like the building of the BBC headquarters, and so forth. So you'd want to be talking about the solutions and specifically naming and referencing some examples for that case study. Okay, let's have a little look at the suburbs. So what's the key idea in the suburbs that you need to review? Well, the idea in the suburbs is that the city is gradually expanding outwards, and therefore there is a pressure on the edge of the city. So you might be asked to reflect on the kinds of problems that people are experiencing on the edges of the city. So what kind of problems does the expansion of the city create specifically for the rural urban fringe? So it's bringing the idea of the suburbs and the rural urban fringe together. So here we're looking at, for example, increased traffic volumes on the motorways around the edges of the cities, or you might be, for example, needing to talk a little bit about how people are moving into little villages on the edge and how these villages are becoming threatened by commuters, and they're losing their original look and their original communities. So you will have when you were looking at this particular issue, have explored some of the problems of urban sprawl. And that's what we were talking about. Okay. Right. As we look further down here, you will see I have obviously got a bit more detail in describing and explaining problems of the CBD, describing and explaining the inner city and how they're solved. So I've already talked about that. Describing and explaining changes on the rural urban fringe, why this area is being developed. So why is it so popular for developments? Why are people maybe moving out of the city? What's so desirable about areas beyond the city, which would then ask you questions about what's the problem in the city? What's the problems of urban sprawl? We've already talked about that. And if we look down here, what things can be done to solve? So, for example, solving urban sprawl might be, for example, building new towns or using green belts or other solutions that you will have explored. So any of these areas could be talked about, and you need to think about as many of these as you can in the context of Glasgow, or in general, providing some examples to support your answers. So, for example, this final point you wouldn't have studied it in the context of Glasgow. You might have looked at it in general about what's being done around the UK. Second key theme that you're going to want to revise is going to be looking at shantytowns. And this is really just two areas. So you might be asked to describe and explain problems. So describing would just be identifying a problem, explaining would be saying why it's a problem, how does it affect people? And you would want to write your answer in the context of the shantytown that we studied, which was Dharavi in Mumbai. So that's one type of question. The other question would be solutions to these problems. Okay, so what are they doing in India? What are they doing in Dharavi? And that might be don't just describe the solution, but then explain. So, for example, this might be referring to self-help schemes, for example, or building water pumps, or site and service schemes, or building more schools. Whatever your solutions are, you've got to tell me what the solution is and then explain what problem is it solving. Okay, right. That covers the material for urban geography. But as with all urban geography, there is more often than not quite a number of key map skills. So let me just jump back one page on the revision website to the topic areas that come in under human environments. And let's look at the urban OS map skills. And it is likely in any assessment, whether it's a past paper that you might be looking at, a prelim exam, a final exam, that there's going to be quite a few map skills that relate to this topic. So I'm going to quickly run through those as well. What are the typical map skill questions that you're going to encounter? Which ones are you going to practice for, or is it worthwhile making sure that you can do? Okay, so if we just do a quick review once again of the checklist, and you can then look at the practice questions and your own notes. Okay, just waiting for this to load up. Okay, right. In this checklist, you can see, and if I can click on it, it will allow me to open up, that the first key skill, once it's loaded up, you'll see, and I'll refer you to this, is to be able to identify an urban zone by giving map evidence. So for example, you might be asked to look in a CBD in a grid square, okay? And they will give you the grid square. They'll tell you where the CBD is, and you must give some map evidence. Now, this would be 3 or 4 marks. And if you're only asked to just identify and give map evidence, you would just be saying there is a town hall at 364-232. There is a grid street pattern in this grid square. There are many churches, for example, at 332-467. That would be what you would do. You might be asked to give map evidence and explain. Now, if you're asked to explain, that's a little bit higher order. So you must say, for example, there is a grid street pattern in the CBD. This is because this is the way streets were built in the past. There are many churches in the CBD because this was the city a couple of centuries ago. And people were far more religious in the past, and that's why all the churches are there. So that would be you explaining the evidence. That's a very common exam question where you get asked to identify 1, maybe even 2 different urban zones and to give map evidence. Okay, very common question is this next one. Now there are, you can see there's a number of these ones. This is a business park. This one is a housing area. It could be a supermarket, and it may be that one has already been built and you are asked to explain, giving map evidence, why it was built there. You'd be referring to the land being flat, motorways nearby. It might be that there's housing in the area. There's maybe a nice attractive landscape. There's forests. There's going to be a number of things, probably more things than you need. It could be a 4 or 5 mark question, but you must always give grid references for the evidence you give. And if you're asked to explain, then for example, if it was, let's say it was a new area of housing, you might say the M26 runs past at grid square or at grid point 632446. People living in this housing area could use this to get to work. That would be you explaining as well as giving map evidence. Okay. Another one, very common question, is where you get an aerial photograph with 3 or 4 points linked, pointing on your photo, and there'll be arrows pointing to them, and they'll be labeled A, B, C, and D. And that photograph will be linked to your Ordnance Survey map. And you must identify what A, B, C, and D are on the photo by looking at your map and identifying the same places that are on the map that match up with that on the photograph. Okay, and you'll have practiced some of these in class, and they do crop up every couple of years. Okay, some other kind of typical questions that you might see. You might be asked to measure the distance between a couple of places. How far are 2 things on a map? That is a simple scale question. My top tip there is every grid square on a map represents 1 kilometer. So it's a quick way of measuring distances. There is a scale always at the bottom of a map. You might be asked to explain why why people are living on the edge of a city or living outside in a village near a city. And once again, it would all be about giving map evidence to tell why people might be living there, as well as maybe explaining why they're no longer wanting to live in the city as well. So that's bringing together some knowledge that you've got from the main urban geography topic to your map skills topic. Okay, so be prepared both for urban map questions as well as urban map skills questions. Good luck, and I would use these checklists as well as my advice and the tutorials that you'll find on this website to help you prepare.